Hello, friends, neighbors. John, your neighbor here. Welcome down the Nook. And happy Sunday. On Sunday, I like to shoot some samples, and while these are in bottles, they're actually samples from Paul. Paul, great friend, drops off whiskey every now and then, and he dropped these bottles off a while ago and then reminded me I hadn't shot them yet, so I haven't had these. I've just poured them, and they have nothing to do with each other. I've got Copperworks. It's an American single malt whiskey. Lived its entire life in Fino sherry casks. So that's pretty unique. And then also wildly unique is this moonshine. This is 100% BC honey barrel-aged moonshine from Salt Spring Shine. So these will have nothing to do with each other. I imagine they will taste nothing alike, but maybe that's the spirit of Sunday Samples. Why don't you pour something? If you got these, great. If not, pour something unique and let's share a moment. 3, 4. Well, thanks for coming back. As I said in the opener, I don't know anything about these really. I haven't had them, and they're not alike, at least not on the surface. This first one is an American Single Malt, and I've been attracted to American Single Malt lately because I have generally enjoyed that interplay of good maltiness mixed with newer oak or more bracing oak, right? A lot of the single malts we get are in used casks, a lot scotches, for example, and that's a different interplay. Certainly take age to get the flavors right, whereas American malt seems to be, that aggressive wood. But that's not what this is. This is released at 50%. It's only 30 months in cask, so 2.5 years, so very young. It says pale malt on it, and I did see that they distill their liquid twice. So they do distill twice. They're using a pale malt. It's aged 30 months or 2.5 years in Fino sherry casks, released at 50%. So wild, just wild. First off, I want to say the color on this is fantastic. I mean, it definitely screams sherry bomb. So I imagine those two casks, even though although it says single barrel, but online I went and it looked like they said they had two smaller sherry casks that they put into this. Anyways, let's give this Copperworks special release number 33, nose and taste. Whoa, so it definitely has resinous, thicker sherry notes. Like I've got those dark fruits coming up. But the whoa is there's something else going on in here. They mentioned the tasting notes. You should never read tasting notes before you try something the first time. Really, just go in, see what you're getting. But they said linseed oil. And I hate to say it, but I definitely am getting a little bit of that approach. It's pretty young. And it's got a little bit of that furniture polish going on. But it also has a real bracing of sherry. Like I'm definitely getting some dark sherry and furniture polish. Okay, let's give it a try here. Try it on the palate. Cheers. Okay, I was warned. Paul also said when you get to it, it's a little funky. It's very funky. I can get a little chewy malt. I can get a ton of black cherry, thick fig drying on the palate, and I also get some unique wood polished. Another note. It's in my head now, like an olive, kind of a green olive. Whew, better try another sip. Yeah, I'm liking that now, but for me, actually, it's more a fermented olive. I really like olives, actually, so it's almost like I said green in the beginning because it has a bit of that pine green, right? But if I'm going to go with an olive note that I'm tasting, it's actually more like a mature, fermented, dark black olive in the sense of it has depth, and maybe that's from the sherry interplaying with the pine. This one's all over the map. This is an experience whiskey. This is kind of whiskey that I actually love coming across, and I really love finding in a tasting like this where someone's said, hey, you know what? You should give this a try. The 50% gives it some good heart, some backbone. I'm getting some spicing, but the spicing up front was, Christmas spicing. The spicing now is a little more heat. It's both back, palate, throat. So it probably just speaks again to youth and 50%, but that's wild. I am confident that if I were to see that on a shelf, I probably would not bring the bottle home. But if I had it on the shelf and someone who drinks whiskey was coming over, I might go, hey, you should try this. Give it a go. Because it is unique. It's an interesting experience. I know from seeing their website, these guys have moved into more mature products, right? They're in into the 3, 4. They've got more years behind what they're going on behind this young one. But certainly as a unique release, as a special event, this is a lot of fun. Thanks, Paul. So clearly, I review whiskey. I enjoy whiskey, and sometimes people will pour different spirits for me, and it's fun. It's fun for me to understand brandies and cognacs and even aged rums, and I appreciate the experience, especially if shared with someone who has a passion for those spirits the way I like to talk about whiskey. However, I'm really not that knowledgeable outside of, all the different variations of whiskey, Canadian and bourbon and Scotch and Japanese, Irish. I really enjoy that journey. So when someone says, hey, you should try this barrel-aged honey, I'm up for the experience, but I'm not a deep consumer of meads, which would be less strength than this. I don't know what makes a good honey spirit, what makes a less good honey spirit. Though this looks fun. From 100% honey, they've distilled and released this. They've barrel aged. I don't know how long. I don't know in what barrels. It's released at 42%. And that is all I know. That it's barrel-aged moonshine, 42%. So certainly the color looks wildly different. It looks probably how honey should look if it's been aged in a barrel. Let's check it out on the nose. I expected it to be nothing but honey, just super sweet, because I often get that note in sweet whiskey. Instead, I'm actually getting a bit of a sour note, like a sour, not sour cherry because it's not a red fruit, but some kind of slightly soured pear. Yeah, there's sweetness if I stay at it, but surprisingly not an overwhelming bouquet of honey, because I definitely get that in some whiskeys and yet not here in 100% honey. Yeah, there's a sweetness there. There's some sugar, which I could link to a honey, but the first thing I get is like a soured pear. All right, let's try it on the palate. Moonshine honey. Cheers. Surprisingly light. Surprising. I guess I continue to think thick, right? I mean, honey for me is definitely a sweetener, thickener. Like it has a lot of body. This is very light. It's almost thin. It just cleans the palate, tastes a little bit like pretty light, pretty young whiskey. There's not that much oak on it. So it is barrel aged, but it's just been touched by oak. Another quick sip. I don't have much to add. It kind of tastes like a very, very, very light, very, very young whiskey. And for the whiskey style, might even play toward a rye. And by that I mean there's not that malt nuttiness. There isn't the mouthfeel of wheat. It's thin, which rye can be a bit thin. And it's a little spicy on the palate, and it dissipates pretty quick. Rye can be clean. So it kind of tends toward an extremely young rye, but it doesn't have that rye grain, bread, even the grass, menthol. So it doesn't have any of those rye. So it's not a rye anyway. It's a spirit, and it tastes like a spirit. Surprisingly less like I had imagined it was going to taste like whiskey, but then I tried to stir some honey into it, and then I tasted it. I'm like, oh, look at all this honey and whiskey. It's not that at all. It's like a extremely young spirit. I've had my fair share of new make, and it's actually pretty close to that. So this was what I think Sunday samples should absolutely be: exposure to different than you're getting on the shelf. And this only Fino Sherry, very young American single malt, was unique. And if any of that interplay between those, really, I would say thick, like black cherry sherry notes interplaying with some fermented malt, which I ended up describing as like a black olive, which maybe isn't a good thing to say, but it was this interplay that was just funky. That would be a good way to go. If you are someone who just wants to try a little bit of moonshine, see what that's like, I think these guys are fun. I looked at their website, nice and local. If you're in Vancouver and you can get to Salt Spring, I certainly would visit them, take a dram, and probably end up with a bottle too. But critically, if we're looking at it compared to whiskey, it's just not going to hold up for whiskey. Anyways, thanks. And thank you, Paul. I now am ready to return the bottles. You take care. Bye.